breaking the stories nobody else can touch. Bloom Daddy on News Radio 1170 WWVA.
Is it ever appropriate to spank your child? And I want to bring on Lori Vann, licensed professional counselor. Lori's been on the show numerous times. Lori, good morning.
Good morning.
All right, so let's just start with that question. In your mind, is it ever appropriate to spank a child?
I don't think spanking is inherently evil. I think that if you follow certain guidelines, that it can be effective. The problem is that when people don't follow those guidelines and you have situations that become abusive.
I had my 17-year-old son on the show about an hour ago because he was raised getting spankings when he acted up, and he talked about it. And there was a expert out there who said you don't need spanking to change behavior. It's not effective at all. It increases aggression in children. It has emotional consequences. And he disagreed with all of that. And it's not because he knows when I get home I'm going to give him one if he doesn't. But he said, I didn't like it as a kid, but I knew that if I misbehaved, it was coming, and it made me walk the line. It made me, his exact words were, pain makes you not want to go down that road again. And I asked him point blank, Lori, I said, did I ever spank you more than twice? And he said no. And I said, did I ever do it anywhere, other than the butt? And he said no. And I think that's the point you're driving home here. And it's the key with life. If you do everything in moderation, you're going to be okay. And it's the same thing with spanking. But Adrian Peterson went way over the line, Lori.
Oh, way over the line. And I think one of the guidelines you can give is that you cross the line from discipline to abuse when you cause someone to bleed, get welts, or some kind of severe bruising, which, we absolutely saw the damage done to that poor child's leg.
Talking to Lori Vann, licensed professional counselor. Is there a difference, Lori, between using your hand and something like a switch, a paddle, or a belt?
I think when you use a switch, you are much more likely to tear into the flesh, and whenever you start to cause bleeding, whether that's using a switch, a belt, or what have you, then that crosses into the abuse category, because discipline shouldn't cause bleeding. That's going to a different line. I think an open hand is perfectly fine. A belt can be, as long as it's not the buckle that's making contact with the cheeks. And I think location is also a real important factor, too, that your butt has a lot of extra padding. That where, again, it becomes abusive is if you're spanking someone on the back of the legs, on the stomach, on the chest. There are a lot of problems there. I mean, on the stomach alone, your internal organs are right underneath that skin. There's not a lot of padding there to protect them.
Especially when you're talking about a 4-year-old.
Absolutely.
Another question being asked, is there a relationship between being spanked as a child and the drive towards self-injury, cutting, emotional problems later in life?
I have not found that, because the majority of self-injuries that I've worked with, and at this point, I'm roughly around the 370-plus mark on this. The factor that's more likely to happen is emotional abuse. It's not physical abuse.
Why do you think so many people today have an issue with spanking, even when it's done, as we both agree, in a way where it's not abusive?
I think that it's probably received such a bad rap. And you can go back in the generations, and simply with each generation, we've become more lax in our discipline and giving boundaries and consequences. And some of it, I think, is just sheer laziness. Some of it is worrying about perception of, what are other people going to think? Some people, I think, have just been scared into not disciplining at all for fear that someone's going to report them. So they're just immobilized. And you have different people that come out that I sort of wonder about their research, and did they really look into all these different variables before they're making some of these statements that there's nothing good that can come from spanking?
Lori, you're also a domestic violence expert. Let me ask you this. Domestic violence, we think of it as against the wife all the time, but doesn't it also entail kids? I mean, under the NFL's new domestic violence policy, doesn't Adrian Peterson open himself up to what he did to his child, or does that just pertain to a spouse?
Traditionally, domestic violence has just been used in terms of spousal abuse. But you bring up a very good question of, do they then extend that category to include any kind of violence in a household between family members or between people that live there or one another? It's a really good question. It'll be interesting to see how the NFL handles that situation.
All right, Lori, thank you so much for being on the show, as always.
Thank you.
All right, that's Lori Vann, licensed professional counselor, who just said she is not against spanking when it's done properly.